people identify with their recoveries in different ways too. What are those?
We found an interesting thing, and we stumbled on this inadvertently. For example, we wanted to do a recovery survey of people in recovery to measure the prevalence of it, for example, in the city of Philadelphia. So we thought, well, how do we ask this question in a public health survey? So we thought, well, if we ask people, were you once addicted to alcohol or other drugs, but today are in recovery, we would get a certain number of people who would respond to that question, right? They would identify with the language, addiction, or self-identify as an addict or an alcoholic, and self-identify as being in recovery. And we get a certain percentage of people that we ask that question of. But then we found if we asked the question differently, something interestingly happened. If we said, did you once have a significant problem with alcohol or other drugs in your life, but no longer have that problem? Then we got a significant increase in the number of people saying yes to that. And what that told us was there's a larger pool of individuals who actually would meet DSM-4 criteria for a substance use disorder, who do not identify with having that disorder, have resolved that disorder, but don't claim a recovery identity. In other words, they on paper, they are in recovery, but they don't claim a recovery identity. So we describe that as a sort of neutral recovery identity. Neutral in the sense of they're in recovery, they once had but no longer have this disorder, but they don't claim that recovery status. Secondly, is we have people with a very pro-recovery or very positive recovery identity. And these are individuals that you can bump into at the grocery store, and they'll tell you their recovery story in the aisles, between the bread and the bottled water. Mm-hmm. The recovery is very much a core sense of who they are now as a person. And then we have people who have a recovery neutral or negative identity. And the recovery negative identity is someone who clearly identifies as having been addicted, who clearly sees themselves as a person in recovery, but really experiences incredible discomfort and shame related to that status, and is extremely secretive of that. Not necessarily behind a tradition of anonymity, which is really about a spiritual tradition of humility and protection of the fellowship that one is a part of, but is much more secrecy around this sense of personal shame and discomfort if they disclose that status within their current social environment. So we see these three very different styles of identity related to recovery status. And again, those can change over time. With the growth of a recovery advocacy movement, it's very interesting because we're seeing some people, once very ashamed of that status, now beginning to see people and experience people standing up boldly, talking about personal recovery and what it's meant to them and their family and their community. And all of a sudden freeing them to begin to develop a very different sense of themselves as a person in recovery. And I think that's one of the major contributions of the current recovery advocacy movement, is freeing people not only from the drugs, but freeing people from the shame that was attached to the addiction to those drugs.